I'm on a video call here with the CEO and founder of MexEdge, George Reavis. George is an expert in the area of transferring money, and right now we want to dive into these sanctions that the United States government just put on three Mexican banks. So, George, can you give us a little bit of insight into what just happened?
Sure. Last week, the U.S. Treasury Department came out and said that they were going to start imposing sanctions on, like you said, three Mexican institutions, Intercam, CIBanco, and Vector. And they were going to prohibit the transfer of U.S. funds originating in the United States going to any of those three banking institutions. So, the sanctions are supposed to go into place on July 31st, but it has already disrupted sort of the system badly, and it's causing problems all over the place, really.
Yeah, I know several people that were trying to transfer money, and their money is kind of caught in a middle area where it didn't get to Mexico. It's not back in their account. What should those people do? What would your recommendation be?
Well, if the money's already been sent, I think they just have to wait it out right now and see what happens. And even though the sanctions aren't supposed to go into place until July 21st, they're obviously really scrutinizing any transfers that are happening before the sanctions go into place. And I think that's obviously what's causing the delay. So, basically, if and when these sanctions do go into place on the 21st, people need to find other banking institutions in Mexico that are not sanctioned. I mean, there's only three banks that are sanctioned, so they need to open up, another bank account in Mexico. The problem with that, though, is Intercam and CIBanco are some of the only banks that allow you to open up an account without an RFC number. An RFC number is basically just like a tax identification number issued by SAT, SAT being the equivalent of the IRS in Mexico. So without that RFC or tax ID number here in Mexico, you can't open an account at a typical Mexican bank. So, and also to get your RFC number, you also have to have either your permanent or temporary residency. So, right. All of these people that don't have their temporary or permanent residency are going to need to go get their temporary or permanent residency ASAP. And then once they have their residency, they're going to have to schedule a meeting or an appointment with SAT and get their RFC number. As soon as they have that RFC number, they can walk into BBVA, Scotiabank, Banorte, HSBC, any of the big banks and open up an account there, and basically problem solved.
But what's to stop the U.S. from putting sanctions on all the banks in Mexico? I mean, because it doesn't look like the evidence was at least what they presented was not very good to make a case that these banks were doing anything with the cartels.
Yeah, it's a good question. The banks that they went after, Intercam and CIBanco Vector, are all basically like Mexican banks, whereas BBVA is based, I think, in Spain, and HSBC, I can't remember, they're, I think, British or something.
Yeah, they're either, I think they're Swiss, British, they might be from Switzerland.
Yeah, I can't remember. But, a lot of these huge banks that operate in Mexico are not, Mexican banks. So, they operate in Mexico, but they're not Mexican banks. So, I don't know. I think it would be a bold move for sort of the U.S. Treasury Department to go after some of these massive global banks. So, and they didn't do that in the first time. They just went after three sort of small Mexican banks. So whether they're going to then, increase the sort of the cast net of the banks that they're going after, I don't think that will happen. I think it would be a dangerous move, but who knows? Who knows?
Yeah, but this move seems kind of bizarre because the evidence that they presented against these banks was extremely weak. You were saying that their examples are coming back from $1 million transfers in 2013 or something.
Yeah, they were transfers from a long time ago, and I just read the official sort of sanction that they wrote up. and for CIBanco, they had a couple examples that were in the 1 or 2 million range. Same with Intercam. And those are such small amounts of money. I mean, if they're really attempting to target the global drug trade and the fentanyl problem in the States, that is a $1 billion industry. These small transfers of whatever, $1 or $2 million have zero impact on that, overall drug trade, meaning I don't think that's why they're going after these banks. I think it's something else.
Well, it would appear that they're going after these banks because these banks cater to U.S. and Canadian residents, or not residents, but U.S. and Canadian citizens from establishing or allow them to establish bank accounts here. Because if you live in Mexico, you kind of have to have a bank account, and if these are the only banks that allow you to have a bank account, the United States government is basically forcing people living abroad to say, okay, you either move back to your original country or you get citizenship or a residency in another country. It's kind of what they're doing.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, obviously the U.S. doesn't like their residents living out of the country. I 100% agree with you. And, it's exhibited sort of by this move of sanctioning those 3 banks that is primarily used by American expats, A. And then B, look at all the remittance taxes that were proposed to be in that big, beautiful bill, whatever. I mean, those remittance taxes started at 5% when they, were writing the bill. By the time the bill was written, it had gotten down to 3.5%. And then I think when it got approved, it was down to 1%, but it was only 1% on all cash transactions, meaning any wire transactions were getting around that 1% remittance tax, which is really, 99% of the money sent is not sent in cash, it's sent with wire transfer. So, but it was just them.
Maybe that 1% on the 1% on the cash tax, though, that's like the beginning of the federal income tax was, I think, just 1% when it started. And it only applied to income over a certain level. And so they're probably just getting that tax in there, and then in the future.
So that they can raise it at a later date. I mean,
yeah, they can raise it at a later date, and then they could apply it to everything.
Right. But, they want to make it, in my humble opinion, they want to make it as difficult as possible for Americans that live outside of the country, whether that's through trying to, choke off their money supply by sanctioning banks, or whether that is trying to tax remittances that are sent from the U.S. to Mexico for people living here. I mean, I think it's pretty clear, and the writing's on the wall. I mean, us as immigrants, both me and you, I mean, I think that sucks.
Do you think that when say the Mexicans in the United States send money back to the U.S., are they using Intercam and CIBanco as well? I mean, is that part of the?
I'm sure some do, yes, but no, most of them don't. Because most of them have, if they have relatives here in Mexico, they're Mexican, obviously, and they have RFC numbers, and they can open a bank anywhere. So there's
But
really
they can't open a bank in the United States, though. So how are they moving their money here?
Well, I think a lot of them do have bank accounts in the States. When I lived in Charleston, all my, friends and construction workers, when I was building, they were all Mexican. They all had Mexican bank accounts, and they were always constantly, and still are constantly, sending money back to Mexico.
So the U.S. doesn't have the same restriction on a bank account. You don't have to be a resident of the U.S. to open a bank account like you do in Mexico, then. Not being an immigrant in the U.S., I'm not that familiar with the hoops you got to jump through to open an account, because obviously I'm a U.S. citizen. Yeah.
But I had a bunch of Mexican friends and coworkers in the States that definitely were, I guess, illegal per the new regime.
Yeah.
That all had bank accounts.
Okay. Interesting. So yeah, it looks like the government's just putting the biggest ones that are get hurt out of this sanctions deal are just U.S. citizens that are living in, or U.S. and Canadian citizens living in Mexico that can't get a bank account because they don't have residency, right?
Yeah, exactly. They can't open up a bank account, basically anywhere but Intercam or CIBanco or a bank that doesn't require an RFC. But all of the big banks do.
So now, how is this impacting your business?
It's impacted us a lot just because our phone is ringing off the hook, which is a good thing. But we specialize in larger transactions, as me and you have discussed. So someone who's trying to move whatever, $4,000 a month down here, we're not sort of a solution or answer to that. But for people who are in the middle of big real estate purchases or building a house, that's when we step in. And our phone has been blowing up with people, who are in the middle of like building a house in Cabo, and oh my gosh, all of a sudden I can't send money to Intercam. What am I going to do? Please help, please help. I always ask them, well, do you have an RFC number? Do you have another bank? I think when these sanctions do, even though they're scrutinizing everything now, making everything difficult, I think people need to be careful when they try to find, workarounds like gray area loopholes. Intercam was telling people, oh, we'll just use Wise to do it. Well, right. Do you think the U.S. government is going to be happy if, you're sending money in U.S. dollars to Mexico, but instead of sending it straight to Intercam, you're just sending it to Wise and then to Intercam? I mean, no, that's basically just a workaround that they're going to look at as, I would think, basically illegal. So people just need to be careful if they think they found some workaround that may not be looked upon as legal by the State Department when these sanctions, or by the Treasury Department when these sanctions get put in place.
Yeah, because everybody seemed to be using that workaround that didn't have the ability to get a bank account through a normal ways with residency. So you had mentioned earlier that Wise is also having some issues transferring money. What's going on there? Do you know?
Well, I just think it's the extra scrutiny. I tried to move, I don't know, whatever, $5,000 yesterday or 2 days ago, and typically that would happen in under a minute. And it said, sorry, this transaction is going to take a little longer than anticipated. Your money won't be available until next week. It was a full week away. And I've heard that from a bunch of my friends. These transactions that were taking 1 minute are now taking, several days, if not over a week. So, and I have to assume that that's from just, now they're really scrutinizing and looking at all these payments, and it takes them, there's millions of payments happening a day, and it takes them a while to go through them all and look at them. Wise is not currently a fast option. Who knows? Maybe the Treasury Department comes out and sanctions Wise too. I have no idea. We'll see.
Yeah, hope not. I think they've used that sanction tool a little too much, and it's going to be, ruining the tool here very soon. They're going to have every country opt out of the SWIFT system here pretty soon. So what do people do that have a bank account right now with CIBanco or Vector or Intercam? I mean, do they panic, or do they not panic? What do you do? Because I was telling people to panic.
Yeah, I don't want to create undue panic because the Mexican governments have stepped in to, basically take operational control of these banks. But, think about this. If you're Intercam, your entire revenue model is based on monies coming in from the States and converting those into pesos. And whatever, if 70% of your clients are Americans, and it's probably around that number, maybe a little higher, a little lower, and then overnight that revenue gets just chopped, then how long can the bank sustain that type of loss of revenue? Not long, right?
Right.
So unless the Mexican government comes in to subsidize the banks, I don't see them making it more than a couple months without having to basically close up shop. They've got branches all over the country. They've got thousands of employees, and all of a sudden their revenue is cut by 70%. That just, doesn't work on a long-term basis. So if they don't get this figured out incredibly quickly, I think it's the end of the bank. So, Do I want my money in a bank that sort of has the writing on the wall that there's a good chance it could be whatever out of business in a few months? I personally wouldn't want my money there. So I think we have some time. I don't think it's like, oh, let's have a run on the banks and go get all of our money out. But I think it's something people need to pay close attention to and see how the situation evolves. And if it looks like it's getting worse and worse, I wouldn't want to have my money in a banking institution like that.
Right. Yeah, I don't think I would either. I was telling people, yeah, if you have money there, you might want to try to pull it out if you can.
Yeah. I mean, the credit rating on Intercam, I think, and CIBanco went from like AA to B negative, or I don't know the exact rating, but overnight as soon as the sanctions were implied. And
Right.
that's obviously because, everybody knew this could be the end. So, if their credit rating is getting downgraded dramatically and rapidly, that's a good indication of what is potentially to come.
Yeah. It's just interesting or suspicious, I guess, that the banks targeted are the ones that help the non-Mexican residents the most, right? These are the banks that help the people that don't have residency in Mexico, which are typically from the U.S. and Canada, the majority of them, maybe Argentina. And that's the group that they're hurting the most. It doesn't make a lot of sense.
That's the group that they're hurting the most, yet they're claiming that they're going after fentanyl and the drug trade, but then the examples that they're using as their proof in the sanctions are $1 million here, $2 million there, when we all know that the drug trade is $1 billion industry. So what effect is that going to have on the overall whatever?
Yeah. The drug trade's hundreds of billions of dollar industry, and then
right, it's going to have zero effect on it. So it's obviously not. That's obviously not what they're worried about. This, in my opinion, this is obviously something else. Meaning they're trying to make it difficult for Americans living outside of the country, especially in Mexico, because they've got a grudge against Mexico right now.
Yeah,
it's bullshit, basically.
Yeah, definitely. It definitely looks that way. Did you know, though, the other thing that's I think this is going to create other issues because like these developers that have set up bank accounts at Intercam because that's where the U.S. citizens and Canadian citizens are setting up their banks, so they can set them up and it's a lot smoother transfer. For these businesses now to go open up an account at BBVA, even though they're Mexican companies and all that, it's like a 2-month wait to open a business account. So this is like
is it? I haven't heard that. Is that recent or is that just always it's that long?
I assume always, but I know one of the developers that's kind of caught in this mess, and he has always used this Intercam account for people from the U.S. and Canada to send their money, and had never had an issue. There wasn't even a warning shot fired on this. I mean, typically when the U.S. has issues related to the cartel money laundering, they slap fines on the banks after they do an investigation. Where here they did no investigation. Instead of slapping fines, they just shut them down, which doesn't seem fair at all. But I don't know. But yeah, the business owners here are telling me 2 months to get a new account, which means they could completely could completely just devastate their developments that they're working on. If they can't get any money coming in for 2 months, they're not going to be able to pay for anything, and they could lose the whole development.
Totally.
So this thing has some big issues.
Yeah, but you're exactly right that the main reason that a developer or a Mexican contractor or whatever would have an account at Intercam is because their clients have their accounts at Intercam. Otherwise they would go to any Mexican bank. But if their clients have the account there, it makes it easier. I mean, we were on the phone with a client the other day, and this is very typical for people building down here. Is they'll open basically an account at Intercam, and then they'll give their builder basically access to that account, either through a debit card or just, giving them access to be able to withdraw money. So then they'll send the money to Intercam, and then the builder can just go in and take the money out to pay whomever. But, that's about to be shut down.
Yeah, it's all suspect. I know the Homeland Security in the U.S. has just announced that they've pretty much had all the drug trafficking through the border shut down So if all the drug trafficking is already shut down, then why sanction the banks? Because there shouldn't be any money coming in from drugs anyway. Anyway, it just doesn't. The whole thing just doesn't add up.
Well, the other thing, there was a headline this morning that Trump has just approved the new expansion of some bridge. I can't remember, coming into Texas or somewhere, that he's just approved the expansion of this whole, bridge entrance into the U.S. from Mexico. And it's kind of like, well, why would you do that if you're trying to shut everything down? You're going to put
Yeah.
money into redoing a big entryway into Mexico or into the States from Mexico? That doesn't make any sense to me.
No. Yeah, there's
But
a lot of
this, a lot of the shit coming out of this administration doesn't make sense to me.
a lot of people are concerned. That's for sure.
Rightfully so. People should be concerned, and people just need to pay attention, and also, pay attention to like reliable resources, right? Get off Facebook. Don't listen to Joe and Bob and Juan's opinion. Find real facts and real news and investigate it yourself. To figure out what's going on. Don't believe the internet rumor mill, because that will drive you insane.
Yeah. The problem is, where do you get your real news? I mean,
Yeah,
I don't know.
True.
I mean, in my opinion, Joe Rogan has some of the best news out there. But everything we see and hear, it all has either a liberal slant or a conservative slant. But there's, like when I was young, I remember watching. You had the evening news on at 6 o'clock, and all three networks. You only had three at the time. All three networks aired the evening news at the same time, and it was just facts. It was just, this is what happened. There was no commentary about it to know what the political slants were. And I don't know what the hell happened to our news structure, but somewhere along the line we lost news and started getting opinions. And it's, so I don't know where I mean, it's very difficult to get the news. I mean, you can read the news about almost any story, and there's two sides to it. Ukraine good, no, Ukraine bad. Israel good, no, Israel bad. Palestine good, no, Palestine bad. It's all conjecture and opinions, and there's just not.
For Mexican and Mexico-based news, I think Mexico News Daily does a great job of it. I constantly use them as a resource, and it's not one-sided. They're just sort of telling you the facts, what's going on, let you sort of make your own opinion. But that's, especially since these sanctions have been slapped on, it's been one of my primary resources of information, for sure. And it seems, as legit to me as anything else I've read.
Yeah, I've gotten a few stories from them, but they limit me to like 5 articles a month or something. Cause I don't
Pay for it.
I hate paying for stuff like that.
I know, but you live here and it's a great resource.
Yeah, they'd be if they made it free and then spent money on and then advertise. A lot of people to advertise, they'd make 10 times what they make now.
Well, the business model used to be that, actually, and it was recently bought, or within the last couple of years, and they wanted to remove all the ads just to get rid of the clutter, and have subscriptions, which I think it's like $29 a year or something, which, I don't know. For me, $29 a year, when you get rid of all the ads and the banners and everything, and that the articles that are being published aren't being paid for, and there's no behind the scenes partnerships, I like that.
Yeah. I just, when you couple that $29 with, 10 other news feeds that you're looking at $29, it's like, it's expensive just to get, unfiltered news.
No, totally.
So I'd rather see the ads. Too bad they couldn't do a Spotify model. The free model you get ads, the paid model you get no ads, and then maybe I'd change my tune.
Yeah, it's funny because the only ones that I pay for, news-wise, are Bloomberg and Mexico News Daily, one other financial one, but I don't pay for a lot of them.
Yeah, I usually try to reverse them. Like I'll put the headline into ChatGPT and say, "Hey, can you find the article on this and summarize it for me?" And I probably spend 5 hours a month doing that. So it's not a good use of my time. But it's the principle of paying for services like that. I'm just like, yeah, that's not a good look. Anyway.
You're a funny guy, Sean.
Yeah.
I'm not saying I disagree.
I'll pick up pennies to drop dollars, right?
Exactly.